An actor living on ziti and sausage for a decade. Maybe it wasn't easier back then, but it was different. A struggling actor couldn't isolate himself with headphones, a Walkman, a cell phone, the internet, or 1,000 cable channels on demand. 4 girls living together in one room didn't even have a television. So what did they do? They struggled. Together.
I hear Garson Kanin starts casting Friday.
Garson Kanin?
Friday at 10.
The theater was a community then. There were a whole large group of people. Everybody loved the theater and talked theater.
I couldn't afford to have dinner there, but I went to Sardi's and at the bar, partaking of all the free cheese and Ritz crackers. Everyone was talking about the plays they had seen that night, and everybody was really just fired up with a fever of theater.
It was wonderful. Alfred was so funny because we were so poor then, we couldn't afford Sardi's, so we used to go to Child's and sit all night and discuss theater, you know.
And early on, there was a little place called Ralph's on West 45th Street, where you went when you didn't have much money. That's when you went to Ralph's.
I would go where the actors were, you know. There was a drugstore and all the actors were there.
They'd all come to the drugstore and everybody would have a tuna fish sandwich.
And you'd go in and you'd find out what shows are coming up, and there was a sense of community.
Well, I remember Gray's Drugstore across from the old Actors Studio. It's where I met Rod Steiger. It's where I met Jimmy Dean. Jack Lemmon would hang out there. I remember Jack Warden.
Gray's Drugstore, where you'd get the gossip and the news, and this was vital. It was vitally important to be in those places.
And you went to Walgreens Drugstore?
Walgreens Drugstore.
Walgreens Drugstore.
Walgreens.
Walgreens.
Walgreens was a Walgreen drugstore in the Astor Hotel where we used to all meet, and sometimes they couldn't afford to pay our bill, and they would carry us for a while until we got a job.
Steve and I had an important lunch sitting at the counter at Walgreens, and I remember us talking about the future of the theater and how we'd be part of it before we were part of it.
I didn't hang out with the gang. I never went through that drugstore period. I went to saloons like a crazy person because, boy, that was fun.
All the comedians hung out at Hanson's Drugstore at like 50th and 7th Avenue, where my pal Tom Poston took me there. And I'd sit at that table with those comics, Jackie Leonard and Lenny Bruce, and they would go bang, bang, boom, and they never laughed. I was the only one laughing. You know, I was 20. They'd say, funny.
I think Leo Shell had a newspaper, and they would send kids for auditions for things.
I would look in the paper. There was a column called News of the Rialto, and it would say what plays were coming into New York. If you got it in early September, it could list the season, what was promised and hoped for, it used to say.
Years ago, you went door to door between the producers and the agent's office, and you made yourself known to them on a one-to-one basis.
I was 18 at the time, and so I went to the William Morse office, and I was sitting next to, by the way, Comden and Green were on my right, and they weren't Comden and Green yet.
We were making the rounds of the offices, because that's what you did in those days.
I was just an unemployed fellow.
We had to write to give ourselves material to perform, because we couldn't afford to buy material. So we just, as we say, we chipped in and bought a pencil and started to write.
And that's where we, down on our luck, actors would meet. And one of them was Jimmy Dean. And Jimmy and I became friends, and Jimmy and I started making the rounds together, keep each other company for the rejections, which were often.
You usually didn't get very nice treatment from the secretaries.
I said, I'd like to see Alfred Ludlam von Tampley. Do you have an appointment? I said, why are you so mean to everybody? She said, I'm not. I said, yes, you are. You bark.
They brush you off and say, yes, well, Mr. So-and-so is busy right now.
It was so discouraging. I would go into office after office after office, and it's not an ego builder, that process.
I don't think you even left picture and resume in those days, but you left your name and hopefully got an appointment.
Then in the evening, you had a bite, fell flat into bed, and started again early the next morning.
I mean, the idea of doing that now is ludicrous. I passed a pile of 8x10s, you call them, and with resumes on the back at the theater where I'm working now. It was about this thick, and on top of it, it said shred. Well,
4 of us bought a dress. Each one of us put in $5. So it was a $20 dress at Bloomingdale's, which was expensive. Then if you had an audition and you got first claim to it, you got to wear the dress, but then you were responsible for having it cleaned and put back in the closet for the next person.
I just know that I loved walking down 46th Street and stagehands and dancers hanging outside, and it was, the streets were packed with our people.
I remember 46th Street at the Howard Johnsons. We'd all meet at the Howard Johnsons. You know, we'd get our number, you know, number 156 or number 283 would be your audition number, you know. And then we'd go get coffee or a grilled cheese sandwich.
You could sit out in Schubert Alley in the sun before a matinee. People would walk by. It was a happy time.
And you knew everybody's name, even in the other theaters.
Back then, there weren't so many of us. We knew everybody who was in show business of any kind. We knew the jazz musicians, we knew the strippers.
It's almost a big family, you might say. Everybody outside of the theater is a civilian.
We didn't have that in Hollywood. It didn't stem from jealousy. It's just stemmed from the way Hollywood is laid out.
I mean, out here, you don't see anybody. Nanette Fabre and I have been trying to have lunch together for, I think, for a year.